In early 1944, Adolf Hitler believed he understood his enemies. He believed he understood their limits, their habits, their weaknesses. For years, his generals had studied British caution, American inexperience, Soviet brutality. War to Hitler was a contest of will, and he was convinced that willpower, not flexibility, decided history. But there was one enemy commander he never fully understood, one name that unsettled him in a way no Allied army ever did. That name was George Smith Patton Jr. By the spring of 1944, Hitler believed Patton was finished, disgraced, neutralized, removed from meaningful command. The man who had terrorized German forces in North Africa, who had driven armored columns faster than German doctrine allowed, who had humiliated Rommel's Afrika Korps, was no longer a factor, or so Hitler thought. That belief would shape one of the greatest intelligence failures of the war. And when Hitler finally realized Patton was not only alive, but active and moving, it triggered panic at the very top of the Third Reich. To understand why, you have to go back to where German fear of Patton began. German respect for Patton did not start in France. It started in the desert. In North Africa, German commanders encountered something they had not expected from the Americans: speed, relentless pressure, an enemy who did not pause, regroup, or wait for perfect conditions. Patton attacked when others rested. He advanced when doctrine said consolidate. He exploited weakness immediately, without hesitation. German after-action reports described American armored thrusts that made no sense on paper. Units appeared where they should not have been able to reach. Supply lines were ignored. Risk was embraced, and at the center of this chaos was Patton. Erwin Rommel noticed first. Rommel understood speed. He understood momentum. He understood that hesitation killed armies, and he recognized those same instincts in Patton. In his personal correspondence and later recollections, Rommel acknowledged that Patton was not reckless. He was aggressive with intent. That distinction mattered. German intelligence began collecting everything they could on Patton: his speeches, his movements, his habits. They noted his flair for theatrical displays, his profanity, his strict discipline. But beneath the surface bravado, they recognized something more dangerous. Patton understood operational tempo better than almost any Allied commander. By 1943, German field officers had learned to associate Patton's presence with immediate pressure. When Patton appeared, something broke. Lines collapsed faster. Retreats turned chaotic. Defensive plans unraveled. This reputation followed Patton across the Mediterranean and into Europe. And then suddenly he disappeared. In early 1944, Patton was sidelined after the slapping incidents in Sicily. The Allied command publicly disciplined him. Newspapers reported his disgrace. Rumors spread that his career was over. To the German high command, this was confirmation of what they hoped was true. The most dangerous American general had been neutralized. Hitler believed this wholeheartedly. German intelligence reports reaching Berlin in early 1944 stated that Patton no longer held a field command. Some suggested he might be reassigned to a training role. Others believed he would never command troops in combat again. Hitler accepted these reports eagerly. This belief created a vacuum in German threat assessment. Because while Patton was publicly sidelined, privately he was being prepared for something far more dangerous. The Allies understood something the Germans did not. Patton's reputation was a weapon, and they were about to use it. In England, as preparations for the invasion of Europe intensified, Allied planners faced a monumental challenge. They needed to convince the Germans that the main invasion would not land in Normandy. They needed German reserves held away from the true landing zone. They needed hesitation at the highest levels of German command. And they knew exactly how to do it. They used Patton. In early 1944, Patton was quietly placed in command of a fictional army group. On paper, it was the most powerful force the Allies possessed. In reality, it barely existed. Inflatable tanks, fake landing craft, wooden airplanes, radio operators transmitting false traffic around the clock. This phantom force was stationed opposite the Pas de Calais, the narrowest point between England and France. And Patton was placed at its head for one reason. The Germans feared him. German intelligence intercepted radio traffic. They photographed troop movements. They observed Patton visiting units, inspecting camps, making speeches. To them, this could only mean one thing. Where Patton went, the main attack followed. Hitler was convinced the invasion would come at Calais. He was convinced because Patton was there. He was convinced because Patton would not be assigned to a secondary role. He was convinced because Patton was the Allies' best offensive commander. Normandy, in Hitler's mind, was a diversion. Even after D-Day began on June 6th, Hitler refused to believe Normandy was the main invasion. He believed it was a feint. He believed the real blow, led by Patton, was still coming at Calais. German panzer divisions were held back. Reserves remained frozen in place. Orders were delayed. Decisions were postponed. All because Hitler believed Patton was waiting. This belief alone may have cost Germany the war in the West. But the real panic began later. Because once the Normandy beachhead expanded, Patton suddenly reappeared. In August 1944, Patton was unleashed. Third Army was activated. Patton crossed into France and immediately began moving at a speed that stunned even Allied commanders. German lines, already weakened, began to collapse entirely. Entire corps were outflanked. Supply depots were overrun before evacuation orders could be issued. German commanders sent frantic reports to Berlin. Patton is moving faster than expected. Patton is exploiting gaps immediately. Patton is not stopping. For Hitler, this was not merely bad news. It was a betrayal of expectation. Patton was not supposed to be here. Hitler had believed Patton's role was deception, a threat held in reserve, a name used to frighten German intelligence, not a real force on the battlefield. And yet here he was, driving armored columns deep into France with terrifying speed. The realization hit Berlin slowly at first. Then all at once, Hitler reacted badly. Orders became contradictory. Units were told to hold ground they could not defend. Counterattacks were ordered without fuel or air support. Commanders were dismissed, blamed, replaced. The chain of command fractured under pressure. Hitler demanded to know how Patton had appeared so quickly, why reserves were not in position, why intelligence had failed to predict his movements. The answers did not satisfy him, because the truth was simple and terrifying. Patton had never stopped preparing. German intelligence had mistaken public disgrace for strategic removal. They had mistaken silence for absence. They had underestimated how deliberately the Allies manipulated Patton's image. And now the man Hitler feared most was loose. Captured German officers later admitted that Patton's return shattered their confidence. They had expected a slow, methodical advance. Instead, they faced relentless pressure, attacks at unexpected hours, flanking movements that ignored conventional logic. Patton did not fight the war Germany prepared for. He fought the war Germany feared. And Hitler knew it. By late 1944, Patton's name appeared repeatedly in Hitler's conferences, not casually, not abstractly, but as a specific threat. Hitler began issuing orders that explicitly referenced Patton's movements. He demanded updates on Third Army more frequently than on any other Allied force. Patton had become personal. This was not rational strategy, it was obsession. And obsession leads to mistakes. The German decision to launch the Ardennes offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, was influenced by this fixation. Hitler believed a sudden blow could disrupt Allied momentum. He believed speed could shock the Americans the way Patton had shocked Germany. But once again, Hitler underestimated Patton, because Patton was already preparing. When the German offensive erupted in December, Allied commanders were stunned. But Patton was not. He had anticipated the attack. He had planned for it. And when orders came to relieve Bastogne, Patton moved an entire army faster than German planners thought possible. This shattered what remained of Hitler's confidence. German reports from late December show clear signs of panic. Mentions of Patton are frequent, urgent, desperate. German commanders realized that their offensive timetable had collapsed the moment Patton turned north. Hitler had hoped to split the Allied armies. Instead, he had awakened the one commander who could react instantly. And when Hitler finally accepted that Patton was not just alive, not just active, but shaping the battlefield, it was already too late. The man he believed neutralized was dictating the tempo of the war. And that realization terrified him. By the winter of 1944, fear of Patton inside the German command structure was no longer subtle. It had become ingrained. German officers did not speak of him as just another Allied general. They spoke of him as a force multiplier, a commander whose presence changed the behavior of entire armies. When Patton moved, German plans had to be rewritten. When Patton appeared on a sector map, units requested reinforcements. When Patton was rumored nearby, morale dropped before a single shot was fired. This fear was not irrational, it was learned. German intelligence officers began to notice a pattern that disturbed them deeply. Whenever Patton took command of an area, the tempo of operations accelerated beyond what German doctrine considered sustainable. Patton did not fight battles in isolation. He chained them together. He did not allow pauses. He did not allow the enemy to recover. Retreating German units found themselves pursued relentlessly, attacked again before reorganizing, hit from unexpected directions. For the German army, which relied heavily on controlled withdrawals and defensive elasticity, Patton was uniquely dangerous. Hitler did not trust many of his generals by this point in the war. He believed most lacked resolve. He believed many were defeatists. But when reports about Patton crossed his desk, Hitler paid attention. These were not excuses for failure. These were warnings. Captured German documents after the war revealed that Patton's movements were tracked separately from other Allied commanders. Intelligence summaries often included specific sections devoted solely to Third Army activity. Analysts attempted to predict Patton's next move, not because it was easy, but because failing to do so had consequences. And yet, despite all this, German intelligence made a fatal error. They assumed Patton's personality would betray him. They believed his flamboyance meant predictability. They believed his aggression meant recklessness. They believed his public image reflected his operational thinking. This assumption blinded them. Patton's public persona was deliberate. He understood spectacle. He understood intimidation. He understood how enemies perceived him. But beneath the surface, he was methodical. He studied history obsessively. He memorized campaigns. He anticipated enemy reactions. German intelligence focused on the noise and missed the structure. This disconnect became painfully clear during the Allied breakout from Normandy. When Operation Cobra began, German forces expected a limited breakthrough followed by consolidation. Instead, they encountered something closer to collapse. Patton exploited the gap immediately, flooding armored and mechanized units through weak points faster than German commanders could react. Entire German formations found themselves bypassed, surrounded, or rendered irrelevant within days. Hitler was furious. He demanded explanations. Why were German units failing to hold defensive lines? Why were counterattacks ineffective? Why was the enemy moving faster than German reserves could respond? The answer he did not want to hear was that Patton was operating inside German decision-making cycles. Patton moved faster than German headquarters could process information. Orders issued in the morning were obsolete by afternoon. Counterattacks planned overnight ran into American units already miles beyond their intended targets. This was not chaos, it was tempo warfare. And Hitler hated it. Hitler believed control came from rigid command, from detailed orders, from centralized authority. Patton represented the opposite: decentralized initiative, aggressive exploitation, trust in subordinate commanders to act without waiting for permission. This philosophical clash mattered, because as Patton advanced across France, Hitler increasingly interfered in operational decisions. He issued direct orders to frontline units. He forbade withdrawals. He demanded counterattacks at specific locations regardless of conditions. These orders often came too late. German field commanders found themselves trapped between reality and ideology. They knew holding certain positions was impossible. They knew Patton would flank them. They knew delay meant destruction, but Hitler demanded obedience. The result was disaster. Entire divisions were lost not because they were outnumbered, but because they were immobilized by command paralysis. Patton did not need to defeat them head-on. He simply moved around them, cut supply lines, and forced collapse. As summer turned to autumn, Hitler's anxiety deepened. He had believed Patton would be cautious in Europe. He had believed the Americans lacked operational experience. He had believed Allied commanders would advance slowly, methodically, giving Germany time to stabilize. Patton destroyed that illusion. When Third Army reached the German border, Hitler faced an uncomfortable truth. The enemy commander he had hoped to sideline permanently was now leading the most aggressive Allied force on the continent. And then something even worse happened. Patton ran out of fuel. For a brief moment, German commanders felt relief. Patton's advance slowed not because of resistance, but because of logistics. This seemed to confirm what German planners had believed all along: that reckless speed would eventually break down. Hitler seized on this moment. He believed the pause proved Patton's limits. He believed the American advance had overextended. He believed this was the opportunity to strike back. This belief directly influenced the decision to launch the Ardennes offensive. Hitler believed a sudden, concentrated blow could disrupt Allied momentum. He believed the Americans would be slow to respond. He believed Patton would be caught off balance. Once again, he underestimated him. What Hitler did not know was that Patton had already anticipated the possibility of a German counteroffensive. He had studied the terrain. He had reviewed intelligence reports. He had discussed contingency plans with his staff. While other Allied commanders believed the Ardennes sector was quiet, Patton did not. When German artillery erupted in December, Allied headquarters were stunned. Reports were confused. Communications were disrupted. Units were overrun. Panic spread. But Patton was calm. He immediately understood the scale of the attack. He immediately identified the objective. He immediately began preparing a response. German intelligence officers monitoring Allied reactions expected confusion. They expected delay. They expected disorganization. Instead, they observed something extraordinary. Third Army began moving almost immediately. Units disengaged, reoriented, redeployed. Columns of armor and infantry moved through snow and ice with urgency. Supply lines shifted direction. Artillery repositioned. German commanders could not believe the speed. Reports sent to Berlin expressed disbelief. How could an entire army pivot so quickly? How could an offensive force redeploy and attack in winter conditions? Hitler reacted with rage. He accused his generals of incompetence. He accused intelligence of failure. He accused fate itself of betrayal. But the truth was simpler. Patton had outprepared him. When Third Army broke through to Bastogne, Hitler understood what had happened. His offensive timetable had collapsed. His strategic gamble had failed. And the man responsible was the one he had believed neutralized months earlier. This realization did more than frustrate Hitler. It broke his confidence. From that point forward, Hitler's decisions became increasingly erratic. He clung to territory long after it was defenseless. He ordered counterattacks without resources. He dismissed experienced commanders and replaced them with loyalists. The fear of Patton did not fade, it intensified. German intelligence reports late in the war show a marked change in tone. Patton was no longer discussed as a tactical problem. He was discussed as a strategic threat. His movements influenced German deployments far beyond his immediate area of operations. Even when Patton was not attacking, the possibility that he might was enough to force German commanders into defensive postures. This psychological effect mattered. War is not just about firepower, it is about decision-making under pressure, and Patton imposed pressure simply by existing. Captured German officers after the war admitted this openly. They stated that Patton's unpredictability made planning difficult, that his speed forced constant adjustment, that his reputation created fear among troops and commanders alike. One German officer summarized it bluntly: when Patton appeared, nothing felt safe. Hitler, isolated in his headquarters, increasingly fixated on Patton as a symbol of everything he could no longer control. The American general represented flexibility, initiative, and momentum, qualities Hitler's own command structure lacked. This contrast haunted him, and it would continue to haunt him until the war's final days. By early 1945, the German command no longer debated whether Patton was dangerous. That question had been settled. The debate was how much damage he would do before the war ended. German intelligence assessments had shifted from prediction to damage control. Instead of asking where Patton might attack, they asked how to slow him, how to delay him, how to keep him away from critical objectives for as long as possible. But even that hope was thin. Patton's reputation had grown beyond the battlefield. German officers spoke of him as if he were always present, even when he was not. Units redeployed not because Patton was attacking, but because he might. Defensive plans were adjusted not based on intelligence, but on fear of his arrival. This constant anticipation drained German resources and morale in ways that could not be measured on maps. The irony was painful. Rommel had warned them early. He had understood Patton's style, his speed, his mindset. Rommel knew Patton would not fight the war Germany expected. He would fight the war Germany feared. But Rommel's warnings were lost amid arrogance, internal politics, and Hitler's refusal to believe the enemy could outthink him. By the time German commanders fully accepted Rommel had been right, it was too late. Patton crossed rivers the Germans believed would slow him. He advanced in weather that should have stopped him. He attacked when German commanders expected pauses. He exploited moments that others would have hesitated to use. Again and again, German plans collapsed not because they were weak, but because they were slow. German soldiers noticed this before their generals did. Prisoners captured by Third Army spoke openly about their fear. They described Patton as relentless. They said he never stopped. They said once he began moving, nothing halted him for long. This reputation spread faster than any official intelligence report. Morale suffered accordingly. Units ordered to hold against Patton often expected defeat before fighting began. Commanders struggled to maintain discipline when soldiers believed resistance was pointless. This psychological erosion mattered more than artillery or tanks. It weakened German defenses from the inside. As Allied forces crossed into Germany itself, the fear intensified. The war was no longer distant, it was home, and Patton was coming. Hitler reacted in the only way he knew how. He tightened control. He issued more orders. He demanded sacrifices that could not be sustained. He blamed generals. He blamed soldiers. He blamed fate, but he never accepted the truth that Rommel had seen clearly. That truth was simple. The enemy had adapted faster than Germany had, and Patton embodied that adaptation. After the war, German generals were asked to reflect honestly. With hindsight stripped of ideology and fear, many admitted the same thing. Patton had been underestimated. His speed had been misjudged. His preparation had been ignored. His willingness to act without waiting for perfect conditions had repeatedly disrupted German plans. One former German staff officer summarized it with quiet resignation. "We planned carefully. He acted decisively, and in war, decisiveness wins." Rommel's warning had not been about Patton alone. It had been about a new kind of warfare, a kind that valued initiative over caution, momentum over rigidity, and opportunity over doctrine. Patton represented that change. Germany, bound by hierarchy and fear of disobedience, could not match it. That was the real failure. Patton did not defeat Germany by himself. No single man could. But he forced Germany to react on his terms. He dictated tempo. He imposed uncertainty. He made the enemy feel late, rushed, unprepared. And once an army feels that way, it is already losing. Rommel understood this early. Hitler did not, and the generals who ignored Rommel paid the price. By the time the war ended, Patton had become more than a general. He had become a lesson, one written in speed, pressure, and relentless movement, a lesson that armies would study long after the guns fell silent. Rommel warned them, they ignored him, and history recorded the result. If this story showed you how reputation, preparation, and decisiveness can shape entire wars, subscribe to the War Ledger for more untold moments where history turned on a single decision. Like, share, and comment with the commander you believe most changed the course of the war. Because in war, the warnings that are ignored often matter most.